Miracles are some of the most ridiculous things that the religious can point to because they can't actually show that they're miraculous. So they just tend to play fast and loose with definitions and pretend that they mean anything at all when clearly they don't. Will this get any better? I have no idea. I hope so, but let's check it out for ourselves. Let's check in with Randal Rauser and his miracle claims. Although, they're not really claims, are they? They're just made-up examples, at least so far. Let's just see if anyone is going to take them seriously because, if you had to ask me right now, my answer would be no. Nobody with a brain should, and I don't suspect it's going to get any better from here, but hey, what do I know, right? So let's get right back into the action and see if he's got anything better for us to evaluate. Somehow, I doubt it, but hey, let's just go see, okay?
So I want to give you a scenario. Let me begin with a humorous anecdote. While browsing in a second-hand bookstore, George Bernard Shaw allegedly found a copy of one of his books, which he had once signed over years before to a friend.
That happens all the time. Not really meaning to break in a lot in the middle of his story, of course, but please indulge me. Authors know that most of the books that they sign, they are not going to be cherished by the person that they're signing them for, but they're going to be sold on eBay and similar places for $1. It's why a lot of authors refuse to sign anything unless it's personalized to the person that they're signing for. That reduces prices because most people don't want a signed copy for somebody else. They want people to think that they had it signed themselves. And that sounds a lot like religion, doesn't it? Wanting personal benefits with absolutely no personal effort. So anyway, back to his story. I've already heard it, but for those of you who haven't, enjoy.
And he had written on the cover of the book to so-and-so, let's say to Jones, with esteem, George Bernard Shaw. As the story goes, Shaw purchased that book, that used book that he'd given to his friend years earlier, and he returned it to the friend, while adding a second inscription, with renewed esteem, George Bernard Shaw. Now that humorous anecdote, hopefully that gave you a little bit of a chuckle.
Not really. I mean, granted, we don't know the circumstances under which the event happened, but if Jones or whoever it was sold the book, then clearly they didn't care if they ever got it back again, except perhaps to sell it again for even more money. I don't know that you should really reward that, should you? If it was stolen or something, then sure, but the story doesn't go into that, does it? Catching someone doing it and rubbing their nose in it, though, that might be valuable, and I'd be completely fine with that. Granted, what I think doesn't matter. That's between George Bernard Shaw and Jones or whoever it was. I'm not all that concerned, except to say that this looks a lot like religion, doesn't it? All emotional comfort and not valuing demonstrable reality at all. Using it to get what you can get out of it, which is what a lot of theists do. That seems to be how most people treat religion. They don't take it all that seriously, it's just a means to an end. And they wonder why we roll our eyes at their stupidity. They shouldn't. They really shouldn't.
Provides me with a launching point to talk about a scenario. First of all, a scenario that I read as having occurred some years ago, around World War II and into the 1950s.
If this wasn't Randal, I would immediately think, made-up story incoming, right? Now, I'm not saying that Randal can't do that, but I don't get that sense from him most of the time, and mostly these stories don't really mean anything regardless. So, at least for the sake of argument, and because it is Randal, I'm going to take his story as possibly true, even if it might be ultimately irrelevant, because so far, his miracle claim, if you remember from the last video, that's not going anywhere fast, is it? So, back to Randal's story, already in progress. Make it a good one, please.
Now, unfortunately, I don't recall where I read the story from. I read it in a book, and for all I know, it's not true.
And that's kind of why I like Randal. No other apologist out there would ever say that. They would never want their followers to think for a second that every word that comes out of their mouths isn't 100% perfect and true. And that's not the case. It's all part of the scam after all. So that's 10 points from Gryffindor or whatever, because we virtually never see this kind of stuff in apologetics. Good show, sir. Please continue.
The fact of whether it is true or not doesn't really matter. I'm going to share you that story as I remember it, the outline of it, and then I want to return and fill in the details of that story for my case study for discussion. So here's the story as I remember it. It's about an amazing coincidence. Some person could describe it even as what is sometimes called synchronicity, or what some people have colloquially referred to as God winks.
But that doesn't make those interpretations true. Coincidental things happen all the time. It doesn't mean that a god is responsible. Humans are, by our very nature, pattern-seeking creatures. We want to draw connections, even when those connections don't really exist. A lot of that is why people see miracles in everyday events, because they're desperate to make connections that aren't really there because they don't know and honestly don't care how the real world actually works. This is why I say that your interpretation means very little. That sounds like God to me doesn't mean anything. It matters not what you think is going on, only what you can demonstrate is actually going on. And most people, they don't bother to understand the difference, do they? They don't even bother to try. So once again, back to his story, which may not be true, and he admits that it doesn't matter. But we will listen to it anyhow because, hey, why not, right? We're already here. We got nothing better to do.
The story goes like this. It's a fellow, he had a book when he was a child, and I think he was like his mother, let's say, had given him this book for his birthday in World War II in England, and it was like, to my dearest Percival, happy birthday, Mum. And so then there was like a bombing of London or something. They had to escape very quickly. A lot of their belongings got left behind, including the book.
Let me guess. He found the book years later in New York or something, and now that's a miracle, right? Only God could have moved that book from World War II England to, say, 1980s America, wherever the story goes. But see, here's where that goes wrong. He presupposes God in the first place. There are many other possibilities. Maybe Odin did it. Maybe Ra did it. Hell, maybe aliens did it. You have not demonstrated that a god, any god, is a rational candidate explanation for the event. We might never know. Maybe shit just happens. Maybe there was another kid named Percival whose mother did the exact same thing, and that's the book that he found. Presumably because we're still in the middle of the story and we don't know how this turns out. We all know that memory is fallible and only as good as the last time that you recalled a particular event. The whole thing could all be imaginary for all anyone knows. So there's a lot of other explanations that are a lot more reasonable than, God done it. But let's see which one he goes for.
And like 20 years later, Percival had moved to North America and in fact was living in Indiana. And he walked into a bookstore, a used bookstore in Indiana, somewhere in the 1960s, and he saw a book just like the one that he had had as a child that his mother had given him. And that really stirred memories in him. So he picked it up off the shelf and he was going to purchase it. He opened it up, and on the inside cover, as you can imagine, uh, there was that inscription from his mother: "To my dearest Percival, happy birthday, love, Mom."
Okay, I was off on the location. Sue me, I don't watch this stuff up front. Yet everything else was accurate, right? Not that it was that hard to predict, because that's why he told the George Bernard Shaw story in the first place, because this is really the same story in essence. Now, we don't know if any of this ever happened at all, even Randal admits that, but the religious are well known for telling these just so stories because it gets them where they really want to go, or where they want their audience to go, without actually having any evidence to get there. Because we don't know the context of the story. He said it was in a book somewhere. We don't know where, so we have no way whatsoever to tell how reasonable such a story might actually be. Granted, he hasn't reached any conclusions on the story yet, so we can't say what he's trying to do. It doesn't get him anywhere remotely close to any gods, though, or any supernatural explanations at all. If it happened at all, and we don't know, then it's just a curiosity with no further conclusions that can be drawn. Stapling on other explanations because you really like the idea doesn't make those explanations valid or likely to be true. The best that anyone can say is, we don't know, which is something that the religious really hate to do, because it makes them sad, and that's pathetic.
What are the odds of finding that book in that bookstore that years before, 20 years before, you'd had it halfway around the world in another country?
Unknown, because as I said, you haven't even proven that the story happened at all. And it was the same book that Percival's memories were accurate and all the rest of that. You have to do all of that first, and as Randal acknowledges, this could all just be a tall tale. He doesn't even remember where he got the story. So let's have some perspective. That's really the problem, isn't it? Not just with the religious, but with a lot of non-religious people too, who just leap to unwarranted conclusions because odd things just so happen in their lives. Well, God done it! Prove it! Prove God exists at all. Prove God was actually responsible. It doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what you can prove. And that's the problem with a lot of people, that they're more concerned with coming up with an explanation that they are happy with than it is coming up with an explanation that's actually true. It doesn't matter to them at all if the explanation is complete nonsense, so long as it fills in an emotional void in their desire to understand. So no, even if he was going to present this as a miracle, which I'm hoping he's not doing, but even if he was, it wouldn't be impressive either. All you'd have is an event without a ready explanation. That doesn't make it supernatural. It just makes it unknown.
What are the odds? Right? They blow the mind. It's an incredible coincidence. It's not yet a miracle, however.
It's not remotely close. For it to be a miracle, you'd have to demonstrate that a God done it. And you're not even trying. Because God isn't the automatic answer to any question that you do not have an immediate answer for. You actually have to get there rationally. But the religious have no interest in that at all, do they? They just really want to believe. So let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, that this story actually happened. I figure it probably didn't, but hey, what do I know, right? So you have a Christian and a Muslim and a Hindu who all heard the same story. The Christian says, God done it. And the Muslim says, Allah done it. And the Hindu says, Krishna done it. So who is right? Well, so far as we can tell, none of them, because there's no evidence whatsoever for any of those gods. There are two requirements to come to those conclusions rationally. First, you have to provide evidence that said gods exist in the first place, and that simply doesn't exist. But for the sake of argument, as I said, let's give them the benefit of the doubt for the moment and pretend that they can do that. Secondly, you have to show that those now real existing gods that you have supported with evidence, one or more of them, whatever, actually did the deed. Just because a god exists, that doesn't mean that he finds your car keys every morning. You have to have a demonstrable causal link between the real God that you've already got evidence for and the event in question, and the religious simply don't have that. None of them do. None of them even try. They just assume it, and that doesn't make it true. So once again, without that evidentially supported God that they don't have, without the demonstrable causal link that they don't have, you're right back to we don't know. And that's possibly all you'll ever have. Things don't become miracles until you can prove that they're miracles. So no, I am not remotely impressed.
And it's not yet a miracle, I would submit, in the same way that just finding a rock floating on a pond or a lake is not a miracle.
Because it simply doesn't fit the definition of a miracle. Remember, our working definition here is a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. First off, you can't just assume that it's the work of a divine agency until you can prove that divine agencies exist. I really want it to be true doesn't matter. The divine isn't a rational explanation without evidence that it actually exists first. And as we all know, there isn't any evidence for the divine. It's all just wishful thinking and blind faith. Anyone who wishes to disagree, pony up the demonstrable evidence and we'll talk. Now, it could very well be that we're just talking past each other and that he means something else when he says miracle. I don't know. I can only go by the words that come out of his mouth. However, I see no reason whatsoever to take miracle claims seriously if you can't even show that a real existing God is responsible, which is why I am very unlikely to be convinced by any of this. It all comes down to word games, and those don't impress me. He might be going somewhere else with this, though, so let's get back and see.
Because it lacks an explanatory framework to give it the sign, a semeion, a message of God's purpose, of God's power, of God's action.
None of which is reasonable without proof that a God exists first. This is why you can't start with an emotionally comforting conclusion before you have the evidence to get there rationally. I really like the idea. That means nothing. This is really where I think the religious and non-religious alike fail to cross paths because one is being emotional and the other is being rational. Mostly, at least on the non-religious side, because there are plenty who are utterly irrational on non-religious topics. It doesn't matter what appeals to you. It matters what is actually true in the real world, and this goes for everyone, everywhere, all the time. If you're just being emotional, then you've missed the logic train and you're just standing there being dumb. Don't do that. It doesn't help.
It lacks that additional context. So let me change and add the story and add a few things to give it that additional context to make it a candidate miracle.
Now, I know that Randal is doing this as an example, but haven't we seen this exact same thing from other apologists who do it for real? They just invent stories out of whole cloth that they know will appeal to their followers, and they're free to modify the tall tale at will to make it more effective. Because they don't care if any of it is the truth. Yet, isn't the truth all that really matters? Not to the religious. They're mostly in it for the comfort. The clergy, including apologists, are in it for the money and the power and the control. Some might be clueless and really believe it, but I think that the higher that you get in the pecking order, the less that you care about the claims and the more you care about the benefits. But even if you do believe it, that doesn't mean anything if what you believe isn't actually true. How do you determine what is true? By testing it, by evaluating the evidence. If you're not doing that, or you can't do that, then you are doing rationality wrong. So stop it. It just makes you look dumb.
Let's say that the story goes like this. You're studying at college and you're really wrestling with faith, with whether to be a Christian or not.
And this is why you don't rely on faith. Faith means nothing. I get that the religious hate this, but too bad. Faith is not a demonstrable path to truth. That's why you need evidence. That's why you need rationality and reason. Faith is a complete waste of time. what you wish was true means nothing if it's not actually true. And the second you say that to a religious person, chances are they're going to run, throwing insults and empty threats behind them. Why? Because they have nothing else. The second that you show that you are not interested in their faith, they've got no reason whatsoever to talk to you at all. So they exit stage left as fast as they possibly can. Because these are not people who care one bit about reality. And that's pathetic.
And so you're living in London at the time, and you buy a copy of Mere Christianity, let's say.
Why? It's a crap book written by a hack apologist that's utterly laughable. Now, my distaste for C.S. Lewis is well known, but he really is one of the least impressive apologists out there, at least from a critical thinking standpoint. He's just pandering to the overly emotional and delusional idiots in the pews. It's little more than, wouldn't you really like this to be true? Nope. I don't care what I wish was true. I care what is defensibly true. And you've got nothing like that. And the religious don't know how to deal with that, so they just tend to run away. I just had another one do it a day or two ago where I was debunking everything that they had to say, and eventually they said, well, I can't learn anything from you because you don't respect my faith, so I'm leaving. Yeah, that's a big surprise, right? The second that someone points out how weak the foundation for their beliefs are, they just hoof it for the exit. Because what else can they do? They can't rationally evaluate their own beliefs, and they certainly can't defend them in a way that anyone with a brain will accept. So into the foothills they go. Because these people are just not that bright.
And you read it, and that copy of Mere Christianity has a transformative impact on you.
But that doesn't make it true. This is, once again, just an appeal to emotion. But it makes me feel good. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything, does it? There are all kinds of books out there, religious and non-religious alike, that have transformed lives. But that doesn't mean anything, though, does it? I know people whose lives were changed by reading Dune. That doesn't make sandworms real. So we're right back to square one, with one side caring about the real world and the other side just running away, terrified of it. Which side do you want to live on? Because I know my answer. What's yours?
And you write on the inside cover, it's all true, praise God. And then you sign your name.
That doesn't make it all true, though. It doesn't make praising God worthwhile. That's just an emotional reaction to something that isn't demonstrably so. So what's the point? Because these are questions that you really ought to be asking yourself, but the religious never do. So long as they get that dopamine shot in the head, they're good. But they're not. They're dumb. Because signing your name in a book, and we know where this is going, don't we? But that doesn't make it objectively true. It's the truth that matters. And Randal, as much as I appreciate him most of the time, he has none. So can we please stop saying ridiculous things? Because that would sure be nice.
And then you go on with your life, and you eventually get rid of the book. You begin to have doubts, questions. Eventually, in your late 20s, you reject Christianity and become a skeptic. 30 years later, you're in Indiana. So you've been a skeptic now for close to 3 decades. And you're really wrestling because you have a recent cancer diagnosis.
Which means nothing. This isn't going to get him to God done it any more than the last two examples. If you find the book again, that doesn't mean that God done it. And no matter how many convenient details you throw into your made-up story, that's not going to change the truth. It's not going to make it a miracle. It's the same seeming coincidence now that it was before. No gods required. So let's just finish up his example and give up for a week, because this hasn't been remotely impressive. I just really like the idea. We'll never get you there because ideas are not truth and the truth is all that matters. This is why the religious never get anywhere with skeptics, because they're too busy assuming that everyone is just like they are. Weak-willed, weak-minded, emotionally desperate to get to childish comfort just for the sake of comfort, and we're not like that. I thought Randal was better than that, but I don't know, maybe he's just having an off day, but he really ought to know better than this. Granted, he's still not talking to us, is he? He's talking to his meal ticket. He's talking to the people who really want to believe and aren't going to be asking any of the serious questions that need to be asked because he doesn't really want those answers. He just wants comfort, and that's ridiculous. Be better, Randal, because this is not impressing anyone with a brain.
And you're wrestling with your mortality, and you're questioning, what if God does exist? What if I'm wrong about all of this? You walk into that Indiana bookstore and you think, God, if you are there, give me a sign.
Give us some sort of sign.
But see, you're doing exactly what I said you were going to do. Here's a guy in a vulnerable state. He finds a coincidence and suddenly says, this means something, when it actually doesn't. If he found the book on a day that he wasn't doubting his faith, or he wasn't looking for answers, his reaction would have been, hey, that was kind of weird, because that's all it is. It only has meaning in the interpretation, and the interpretation doesn't mean anything. Facts, yes. Feelings, no. Learn to deal.
And lo and behold, you look and you see a copy of Mere Christianity just like the one you had 30 plus years before. And you grab it off the shelf. How amazing. In fact, you can see it's a British edition of Mere Christianity, which is even more amazing. It's got the pence and pounds sign on the back, so you can tell it's British. You're like, this is amazing. You open up the cover, and with shock, you realize it's the exact same book with the inscription you wrote 30 plus years before saying it's all true.
All right, that's where we're going to stop for the week. The next video, I figure, is going to be reasonably short because we've only got 2 minutes of his content left because I just let this run on for a little bit too long. Sorry about that. But as I've already said, it means nothing more than either of the other two stories, and your interpretations don't make it a miracle. Unless you've neutered miracles so badly that they have no meaning whatsoever. If God didn't do it, then it's not a miracle. Just saying, hey, this means something to me, doesn't mean anything. That's just pure desperation because lots of theists are attached to the idea of miracles. They just know they can never prove miracles, so they just see miracles in the most mundane things because that gets them where they want to go. But that doesn't mean anything. This is still just a coincidence that you're wrapping up in meaning because you really like the idea. And that doesn't make it mean something. Honestly, I expected better from Randal than this. Granted, as I said, he's not talking to rational people. It's sometimes easy to forget that for all of the good things, or at least promising things that he says, he's still a theist, and therefore kind of clueless. Hopefully, he'll get better over time. Anyhow, what did you think of this so far? Like I said, the next one will probably be reasonably short, so maybe I'll do something with it. I don't know yet. That said, though, what do you think of miracle claims? Are you as entirely unimpressed by them as I am? Let me know down in the comments. Souls and miracles are some of the least convincing claims that the religious make, in a whole field of ridiculously unimpressive claims, at least as far as I'm concerned. Seriously, you people need to find evidence, because nothing else is working, and soon you'll be alone just talking to yourselves. I think that'll be a pretty great day when it comes. How about you?